Okay, let's do this. What are we going to talk about today? I want to talk about something today that is, first of all, very important, but I think we're also going to have a little bit of fun in today's discussion. So, what are we going to talk about today? This topic is one that I have been asked about. It's been requested of me to cover. So, today we're going to discuss my hair care routine. Just kidding. Just kidding. And that hasn't really been requested. So I want to talk about this book. So this book right here is called 1 Second After. All right. So I'll come back to this in a moment. So what I want to talk about today is preparedness in general, because I think this is a topic that is becoming very important. So I guess to some degree, we could say it's always been important. But I think over the last couple of years, it has taken a more prominent position in people's minds. And I think rightfully so, right? So this book is a book that I have heard about for years, and people have recommended it to me, and I did not get around to reading it until fairly recently. Okay. So again, the book is called 1 Second After. The author is William Forstchen. Forstchen. All right. And um, what had to happen for me to read this book? Well, the hurricane that came up through, kind of unexpectedly, the one that happened in late September of last year. I think it was the evening of September 26th, 2024. And it infected a large part of Western North Carolina, um, but also East Tennessee, parts of Virginia, parts of South Carolina, maybe even parts of Georgia. But primarily, a lot of the affected area was in the western part of North Carolina and in East Tennessee. Well, I'm from North Carolina and I live in Tennessee. And so now, fortunately for um, my hometown and then where I live currently, I'm from a town that is far enough east that it wasn't affected in North Carolina. And I currently live far enough west in Tennessee that where I live, wasn't affected. Kind of, if I'm from here and I live here currently, the hurricane kind of went between that. So my hometown was largely unaffected, and where I currently live also unaffected. That said, um, there were a lot of people that were affected by this storm. Um, and I did go offer some support in the days immediately following the storm. And there was a lot to see, there was a lot to do. And it made me do a lot of thinking about a topic that I've certainly thought about before, but this kind of made it a little bit more real for a couple of reasons. One, I was there, I was on the ground, I was seeing, I was helping, and there are plenty of people who did a lot more than I did to support. But I was there. I did travel around Western North Carolina for a couple of days. I'm going to go into that a little bit more here in a moment. Um, so I saw some things that made me start thinking a little bit more about this. But then also I was in communication with other people that had perhaps seen more than I did and were thinking about things. They were putting together information. I was putting together information. And one of the things that I was there doing was, hey, I'm just one person and I'm alone, and there's only so much that I can do, but I can at least observe and see, collect some info, and then pass it to people who are coming behind me with more personnel and more resources, and maybe give them just a little bit of a heads up as to kind of what I'm seeing in my limited capacity in terms of what I can do or where I can be, since I'm only one person who can only be in one spot at any given time, etc. Well, what does that have to do with this book? So interestingly enough, this book takes place in Western North Carolina. And the author is from Western North Carolina, and he talks about, he uses where he lived, his hometown basically, as the setting for the novel. So the book came out in 2009. So it's, 16 years old now. I've heard about it for the last couple of years. I actually had the book, I'd already bought it, and I just hadn't gotten to it yet. I got a lot of books. I have a lot of books in my own personal queue as to what I want to read next, etc. And then after that storm happened, and I knew that this book took place in Western North Carolina, and I had a buddy of mine from back home in North Carolina that had also recommended this book to me before the storm. So then the storm happens, and I don't know, this book just kind of shot up um, in terms of importance. And so I just said, you know what, I'm going to read this book. So here's what the book is about. I'm literally going to read from the back of the book here. 1 second after is the story of a man's struggle to save his family and his small North Carolina town after America loses a war that sends our nation back to the Dark Ages. A war lost because of a terrifying weapon, an electromagnetic pulse, EMP, that may already be in the hands of our enemies. Months before publication, 1 second after, was cited on the floor of Congress as a book all Americans should read. It has been discussed in the corridors of the Pentagon as a realistic look at EMPs and their awesome ability to send catastrophic shock waves throughout the United States literally within seconds. EMPs are a weapon that the Wall Street Journal warned could shatter our nation. In the tradition of On the Beach, Failsafe, and Testament, which are other books, this book, set in a typical American town, is a dire warning of what might be our future and our end. Okay, so that's a little bit ominous, but and the author, William R. Forstchen, has written other books. I'm not familiar with them. There are even other books in this series. I also am not familiar with those, but there is a book called 1 year after. There's a book called The Final Day. There's a book called 5 years after. I'm not familiar with any of those, but I would assume those are follow-ups to this one. So I don't necessarily want to talk a lot about. So one, I'm not going to go through the plot of this book because I do think it's worth reading. I also don't necessarily want to talk a lot about what an EMP is or the results that an EMP could have on our country. There are many people who have done that. There are many people who can do that better than I can because they probably have more expertise in what they've studied. So I don't want to be that specific. What I want to talk about is just the idea of preparedness in general. So whether it's an EMP strike, whether it's a natural disaster, whether it's an enhanced natural disaster, whatever, there are some commonalities as to what's going to occur, whether it's a hurricane, an earthquake, or the result of something less natural. Regardless, there are going to be some commonalities that we can look at in terms of preparedness. So again, I don't necessarily want to talk about the weather warfare or whatever, not because I think that that's not important when we talk about what happened in Western North Carolina, because I think it is. That's just not necessarily my focus for today. Okay. I just want to talk about preparedness in general. So we're going to come back to the book. Okay. But what I want to do is I want to actually read you guys a couple of posts that I put out on my social media as I was traveling around North Carolina. Now, why do I want to do that? Maybe you don't care what I wrote those days, but I kind of want to remind myself of what I wrote, but also because I want to put us in the frame of mind that I was in, and therefore other people were in the days immediately following that hurricane that went through Western North Carolina and other, states. Because then we're going to talk about, okay, what lessons can we take from that? And what can we apply going forward? And I'm not going to put together some sort of laundry list as to you need to think of this. That's not the purpose here today. Though we may talk a little bit about that. What I want to achieve here is to get people thinking about these things. And then also, and it's going to sound a little bit weird, but I want people to think about thinking about these things. Those aren't exactly the same thing. Okay. So there's thinking about an item, and then there's thinking about an item. Okay. And that's important too, because sometimes you have to prepare to think about something so that when you think about it, it's more productive. All right. Let's not get too wrapped on the axle with that. All right. Okay. So the storm happened on Thursday, September 26th, I believe. So what, like the evening of the 26th going into the morning of Friday the 27th. Um, I drove so on, I think on Monday. So a couple of days later. So it happens Thursday into Friday. So a couple of days later, I think on Monday, which I think was October 1st. Is that right? Is that right? 26, 27. Maybe that's wrong. Maybe I'm off by a day or so. But I'm pretty sure that I drove. I'm pretty sure that I drove on Monday. Um, but whatever. So a couple of days later, I drove to the affected area, right? Um, and now that's gonna bother me. Let me look up the date and the days of the week because it's gonna bother me if I don't do that. So yeah, okay. Um, yeah, this is right. So it was the evening. So I think the storm occurred on. I know it occurred on a Thursday. If I'm wrong, somebody correct me. Right? I think it occurred on a Thursday, and that was September 26th into Friday the 27th. And then I think I drove from Tennessee to North Carolina on Monday the 30th, and then the very next day, the first, I went into the affected area. And the first the first place that I went was Boone. The next day I went to Asheville, and then I went a couple other places. Okay, so the storm occurs, the 26th and 27th of September. I have to drive around the area to get to my hometown in North Carolina on the following Monday. On Tuesday, I drive up to Boone. I'm helping out. I do a day trip. I drive back a couple hours, east to my hometown. Then the next day, I get in the car early in the morning. I go up, um, and I am in Asheville that second day. So that was Wednesday, and then I also went up Friday and Saturday. So I think on that week that I went up and helped out, what I did was I would drive from my hometown, staying at my parents' house, um, and I would do day trips, and I would go up to Western North Carolina. It's a couple hours drive, and I would be there all day. I went to different places, and then I would drive back in the evening. But I would spend a good portion of the day there, and then I'd head back and do it again the next day. So I went there um, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. Okay, so I spent 4 days there doing day trips. All right, so I'm just trying to. The reason I'm going through that timeline is just so you know. All right, so I was in the area a couple of days after the storm went through. So this is a social media post that I put out. This is from my Twitter on October 2nd. So that is the following Wednesday. It's my second day in the area. And I wrote a couple of notes from my time in Western North Carolina so far. So when I wrote this, I had been there the day that I wrote this. This is like in the evening, and I'd been there the day prior. All right, so this is me. I'm saying, okay, many people have spent more time than me in the region and have been deeper into the more heavily impacted areas. I defer to them, but will share a few of my thoughts. I drove all through Asheville today, delivering some supplies to a couple folks. Many of the main routes are now open, but that doesn't mean smaller streets or more secluded areas are clear. After I left Asheville, I drove down by Hendersonville, south of Asheville, and from there drove to the Chimney Rock / Lake Lure area that was hit particularly hard. I tried to get as close as I could, but the route was blocked a few miles before reaching the exact area. I know many people want to help that area and had asked me about it, so I wanted to get eyes on, but couldn't get there via my approach from the south. Because I've mostly been in Boone yesterday and around Asheville and its outskirts today, I haven't been in many of the little towns yet that may still have great need. It was just me. I didn't have any special equipment, so I stayed on the primary and secondary roads with a few exceptions. Even on some of the roads I traveled, trees and downed power lines were partially blocking routes. I didn't encounter the horror scenes described by others in some of the areas that have been badly devastated. I have no doubt those stories are accurate. I just didn't encounter any of it where I was yesterday or today. There are plenty of people who have been deeper into the more devastated areas that have more accurate depictions of what's happening there than I can give. Cell service is still definitely spotty. I had a roadmap with me because old school land nav is still a thing when or if your navigation system can't catch a signal. I couldn't get any of my hometown buddies to go with me yesterday or today, so I traveled alone. I wouldn't recommend that just because cell service is spotty and there are many reports of looting and robberies. That's another reason why I made sure I was out of the affected region before dark. Yes, I traveled armed. I saw multiple Chinooks and Blackhawks. I also saw military personnel and vehicles, though they were few in number, at least what I saw. The people I talked to yesterday and today expressed two main thoughts. One, their shock at what happened, and two, their sincere appreciation of neighbors and community members that pulled together to help. Lastly, I grew up in North Carolina. Much of my family still lives in North Carolina. I consider myself a North Carolinian. North Carolina is home. That said, I currently live in Tennessee. I also used to live in Georgia. These are my people that have been affected across various states. I'm happy to do my small part to alleviate suffering. In terms of the way the world is headed, things are likely to get worse before they get better. We must cultivate a sense of community. We're going to need it. Okay. So that was kind of my report that I put out on Wednesday, October 2nd. Okay. So, within 5 or 6 days of the storm having gone through. All right. And that was a report basically compiled over the previous day and then what I saw that day. So, a couple of things that we can take from that. One, I'm by myself. And when I was there, I was by myself, not optimal. But, my freaking loser hometown friends felt they had things were more important to do than go help people who, live just a couple hours from where we all grew up. And they still live in my hometown. And I was pretty pissed about that. I was pretty pissed that they wouldn't go along. I'm pissed now. I think that's pretty shitty. Yeah, and I think that's pretty shitty. So I was pretty pissed that I drove 8 hours just to get to my parents' house. So from there, I could go up and do day trips to help out. And other people that live a lot closer that could have definitely helped didn't help. Anyway, whatever. I'm not here to judge other people, but it did piss me off because I felt like they could have helped and they didn't want to. So but so I had to travel up alone. Now, yeah, I mean, I have a four-wheel drive vehicle or whatever, um, but that limits where I can get to. I'm by myself. You know, where can I get to safely so that I can get out? Because here's the thing: if I do something dumb, and when I say this, and I'm saying if I do this, this is just something for people to keep in mind in these types of situations. So this is my thinking. If I try to take my vehicle somewhere where I then can't get out, now I'm no longer part of the solution. I'm part of the problem because now resources have to be diverted from where they're more needed to come and pull my dumb ass out. So if you're there to offer support, you should be there to bring resources, not be a drain on already exceptionally limited resources. Um, so yeah, you can't recover your own vehicle. Don't go somewhere where that's going to have to happen. So there's that. The other thing is, I'll tell you guys this. The number one item that people asked for those first couple of days, chainsaws. Why? Because the routes were blocked, and with a chainsaw, I mean, just think about it. A chainsaw, relatively small tool, compared to like, heavy equipment I'm talking about. But you can get men with chainsaws and they can walk to an area that is otherwise inaccessible. And then by using their chainsaws, they can make that route, now passable. So I will tell you the number one thing that I heard people say the first couple of days, hey, we need people with the chainsaws. So in an environment like that, that's just something to keep in mind. But again, I'm not trying to get too wrapped around the axle with chainsaws specifically, but it's what tools are the most helpful in the beginning, because then they can allow other resources to get to the problem areas. So it's more like thinking about that. Like it's not just, let's not get too wrapped up on the chainsaw specifically. Though obviously a chainsaw is an important thing to have, as well as, people who know how to use it clearly. But also when you're talking about tools, all right, do you have tools that are that use gas, or are you talking about tools that operate on electricity? Because what happens if you don't have the electricity to be able to run those tools? And it's something to think about. I mean, these are issues that people were dealing with. Like, oh man, I got electric powered tools, which are no good because I can't find any. There's no source for electricity right now. Okay. The other thing, a roadmap. So that's not something that people think about nowadays. A roadmap. Well, what happens if I can't get a navigation on my phone like I always do when I travel anywhere, if I don't know exactly where I am? Well, what happens when you can't get the signal? You got to have another way to know where you're going, because even if I grew up a couple hours from that area, so I mean, obviously, I don't know that area. Once I'm off the main roads, like I don't know those areas at all. So then how do I find out where I'm going if I want to use a navigation system, but yet I don't have a signal? Well, how do I know where I'm going? Got to have a roadmap. So when I said in that post about the importance of having a roadmap and then land nav. So land nav, that's kind of a military term, but it literally just means land navigation. What it means is using a map, having a map. So step one in using a map, have a map. So have a map that is accurate, that is, relatively up to date, and then know how to use that map. That may not be quite as intuitive as people necessarily think that it is. It's not as easy as having a map and then understanding the way in which that map represents the terrain. Sounds easy. It's not always easy. How do you orient that map to the ground? How do you recognize the terrain features that are represented on that map? What are some other things that you may need to know? And then in order to know those, you have to kind of understand how they're represented on the map in a way that makes sense. Or understanding distances from a map or elevation changes. That's a huge one. Okay, great. So let's move on. Let's read my next post. So this was from October 4th. So 2 days later, I did not go to Western North Carolina on October 3rd. So this would have been after my third day in the area, but this is important stuff here. Okay. October 4th, 2024. Today, I attended an informal meeting with some leaders of a local church congregation in Black Mountain, a little east of Asheville. I also went to a daily community meeting in the town square. Many of these communities are incredibly faith-filled, and the churches have been a strong pillar now when most needed. The daily community update in the town square provides an opportunity for town leaders to provide utility updates, info on donation sites, supply issues, etc. It also provides a needed opportunity for the people to come together to talk. From today's meetings and other things I've seen the past few days, here are some notes to give you a picture of what's going on. What I'm telling you about Black Mountain applies to many other towns in the region, and it also would apply to other situations at other times. This is why I'm reading these reports here, right? It's because we can take lessons from this that we can apply more generally. That's my whole point with this. All right, let me get back to this. Black Mountain was hit hard, as well as nearby Swannanoa and Old Fort. Other towns in the region were also hit very hard. Big need for water purification tablets. People are pulling water from creeks, but sewer lines are broken and water isn't clean. Sanitation in general is a huge issue because the water is still out. This is hornet season. People are getting stung. Some are allergic, may need EpiPens. People can't wash clothes and need socks, underwear, t-shirts, women's nightgowns, etc. People are donating junk food, but not necessarily donating even slightly better quality food. People are finding bodies, particularly as water recedes. People living in trailers were especially vulnerable to being washed away with their homes. That said, I can't necessarily personally confirm that bodies have been found in the high numbers that some have reported. Let me just stop right there. If you guys remember, I mean, there were reports of like I don't know. I think there was one report of like over 1,000 bodies that were found at one point. That's kind of what I'm referring to. I could not find anybody who could personally confirm anything like that in those types of numbers. But were bodies found? Yeah, absolutely. Getting into remote areas is still very important. The mules have been great here. Traveling on foot is also helpful. Maps are essential. Land nav is still a thing. Navigation systems dependent on internet or cell signal are unreliable. That said, when it comes to phones in the local area, cells are more reliable than landlines because the phone lines are all down. Can't confirm personally, but I've heard that hunting in the nearby national forests has been shut down. People in need of food can't hunt. People here are very resourceful and resilient. Many are prepared, but not necessarily for something they thought impossible to happen, like this storm. There are going to be people who experience very real PTSD from this. PTSD, of course, is post traumatic stress disorder. There are towns that look like war zones. Entire towns look like they endured bombing campaigns with the way many streets, buildings, and power lines are totally destroyed. Many of these people have been through hell. Temperatures have been mild, but cold weather may be coming in. Hypothermia will be a real concern. When people in groups come in to help, they must be as self-sufficient as possible to drain very precious local resources as little as possible. Many problems are compounded by the destroyed roads. For example, damaged homes can't be fixed because the roads to the homes are destroyed, so equipment can't get in to fix the homes. People that may still be unaccounted for are difficult to find because so many roads are still out, making remote areas that much more difficult to access. Lots of towns around here are unincorporated. There's no town architecture to serve as a central node for decision making, information sharing, or coordination of resources. This also means it may be challenging for external groups to find the right who to liaise with in the most affected areas. Some of these areas are just small hollers that can consist of a single dirt road amid the hills. There have been some reports of looting, robberies, and even much worse in the area. I haven't seen it and can't personally confirm, but I don't doubt some of that is happening, and I've traveled armed. Hope some of this helps for those looking to assist in the area or just trying to gain a clearer picture of what's happening. Okay, so let's talk about something here. I already talked about the roads. You know, problems are compounded because you got affected areas, and then you can't get to the affected areas to get the resources in that you need to get in. And if you think it's just as easy as, well, I mean, I'll just go around the roads. Yeah, but I mean, you're in rough terrain, like you're in the mountainous terrain. And sure, the Appalachian Mountains aren't the Rockies, but that doesn't necessarily mean that when you go off the roads, that a lot of those areas are easy to traverse through. They may not be. So, and you had a lot of flooding in those areas. I mean, it was, I went through towns, and incidentally, months later, I went through areas in and around Swannanoa. It looked like not a hurricane, but a tornado had gone through. And this was several months later. I mean, it was pretty crazy. And that was like 2 months later that I went through. And in fact, I've been through there more recently, and it still looks pretty bad in some parts. But let's talk about the unincorporated towns. So they don't have like a town architecture of leadership in place to administrate, resources, et cetera. Or in other places, it may not be that the town is unincorporated, but it still may be hard to share information. We're gonna come back to that, but I'm just trying to, the reason I'm reading through this is to kind of think about with a real situation the ideas that people were generating or the problems that people were at least identifying or some of the solutions that people had identified. And I was just trying to help kind of get the word out for people who might be coming behind. That's what I was doing. I wasn't there to be Superman and try and, fix all the problems myself as one person. I was there, one, because I felt a moral obligation to be there. I did. And I also felt like, well, if I can just get in there and help kind of get the word out, I know other people are preparing to come with more resources. Let me just try to inform them in some small. There are plenty of people who are doing that. I'm just one person. I'm not saying that I'm not trying to talk up what I did. Um, I was just one drop in the ocean of people who are trying to help. Um, okay, I'm going to read one more report of mine. This was October 5th. I think this was the fourth day that I had been there. I think I was there again, October 1st, 2nd, 4th, and 5th. Today I was in Burnsville, Spruce Pine, and surrounding areas of Western North Carolina that were severely affected by Helene. I was unable to get to the town of Pensacola that was so terribly devastated. Lines of communication are improving. The roadways have opened up a lot in the last week. This has further enabled search and rescue operations, which still continue. Riverways that need to be cleared of debris, or riverways still need to be cleaned of debris in many parts. This debris, of course, clogs culverts and drainage systems. Gas stations are opening up. In many places, power is slowly being restored. Water is still out in many affected towns, and that water would remain out for quite a while. The outreach from so many people has enabled even the badly affected towns to set up drop-off depots and donation sites. The Burnsville and Spruce Pine downtown areas were full of people giving out free food to the community. When I approached to drop water off and inquire about needs, I had food shoved at me despite my protest that I came to give, not take. These are really caring people who have come together to help each other in an awe-inspiring way. Everywhere I went, people asked about other towns or told me about the devastation in other places like the small town of Pensacola. None of this should be taken to mean that people aren't still suffering. There are many people still unaccounted for, and some exceptionally remote areas may still need to be searched. Even many of those that are out of danger are still suffering and will endure hardship for some time. Thanks to everyone that is offering support to Western North Carolina, and thanks to all those in Western North Carolina for your examples of strength, faith, and resilience. Even though I'm not from Western North Carolina per se, I grew up a few hours east. It makes me proud to be a North Carolinian. So, yeah, you go to Burnsville. So Burnsville has a really cool kind of town square area. And then Spruce Pine. So when I got to Burnsville, the whole town square area was just full of people that had set up, these little stands, these little tent canopies or whatever, and tables, and people were donating stuff. And I just remember I couldn't get out of there without people shoving hot dogs at me, or like soft drinks or whatever. And I was like, I don't even want to accept this because there are other people who need this. I came to help, but they were like, no, no, no. So anyway, so I had to take a hot dog. But it was, yeah, it was touching. It was really touching, you know? Um, I got to Spruce Pine because it took me several days to get to Spruce Pine because I kept hearing Spruce Pine got hit really bad. And I got to Spruce Pine and the whole downtown area was nothing but people donating clothing and stuff, It was really, really, really touching. And, people told me that the day before, a couple days before, that the river that's right there had been extremely high. Anyway, just really incredible stuff. In Burnsville, there were people from towns, an hour away, or church communities an hour away that had come there to set up a stand or a booth to donate. Just really, really, really incredible. Um, but it's a resilient people. I mean, those people are resilient by nature. And in other areas, you may have people who are less prepared for that type of stuff. At least in Western North Carolina, outside of Asheville or some of the bigger towns, it can be quite rural. So the people, they know how to, they're somewhat prepared, but that doesn't mean that they were prepared for something like this. So anyway, I just wanted to read those reports just to um, help everyone kind of understand what I was thinking about at the time and what I heard other people talk about. So when I was in Black Mountain, so this is the day before I went to Burnsville and Spruce Pine. Um, First of all, I'm on somebody's back deck, and I am at a meeting of members of a certain church congregation that I had found out about from a friend who said, "Hey, my uncle's part of this church. Maybe you can go there and you can help." So now I'm in this this meeting that these guys are having daily to talk about the members of their church community. Hey, have we made contact with everybody? What are the needs that we're seeing? What else? And I was just there taking notes because these guys had already been dealing with this for a couple of days. And so I'm just there taking notes like, man, you guys are thinking about things that I haven't thought about. And then I compiled some of those in that report that I sent, via social media later that day. Like the hornet season. Well, I mean, who knew? So anyway, just stuff like that, right? Um, the but the other thing that was really interesting. So I'm in that meeting. I don't know any of these people. I'm just there to help. Someone said, "Hey, my uncle is part of this church congregation." That's how I kind of got in. Now I'm sitting on somebody's back deck behind their house, just and they're giving me idea. They're helping me more than I'm helping them, because by me participating in this meeting, I am now coming away with a better appreciation of the situation on the ground, and I can then communicate that to other people, which in turn, of course, will bring more resources and the right resources to the right places within the area, which of course, then does help them. But unfortunately, it's not like I'm there with all types of resources that I personally could bring in. Now, when I would go to the area each day, like I delivered the day that I drove through Asheville, I delivered water, I delivered propane. So I mean, there were things that I could bring in personally, but when you're one person, one vehicle, you're a little bit limited as to what you can bring. But I would take a lot of water and stuff into the area. And then let me think. What else? What else did I want to say? So when I was in Black Mountain around their town square, I participated in this community meeting. And this community meeting was awesome because you get all these people that are there. And Black Mountain's a town of a couple thousand people. It's just east of Asheville. And these people are there to hear the latest news or updates that are being put out that day. I mean, this is how people would have communicated, in times before you had internet or TV or phone lines or whatever. Gather in the town square and hear the latest news. So I mean, it's actually kind of incredible to see. So this, to some degree, this is related to an idea that we spoke about in a previous video, the one where I talked about the midnight ride from Paul Revere. So we talked about the 250th anniversary of the midnight ride, and then what happened to Lexington and Concord, etc. And when I did that video, I of course used a little bit of source material, coming from this book right here, right? Paul Revere's Ride. Okay. So I actually want to go back through and I want to read a portion of this. We covered this in the video. And if you didn't go check out that video, you need to check out that video. It was really good. But I want to read a short portion of this book, because even if you listen to that video, and if you did, thank you. Let's go back through one portion and now think about it in terms of what we've been talking about today. Okay. So if you're not familiar with this, you need to go listen to the other video, because I'm not going to necessarily give a lot of background on this, but this is a whole book dedicated to the events that happened April 19th, 1775. So like the evening of 18 April into 19 April, 1775, Paul Revere's ride, etc. Okay, so it is instructive in that regard to compare the conduct of Paul Revere and William Dawes. If you don't know, William Dawes also participated in the ride the night before. Revere and Dawes went about their work in very different ways. Along Paul Revere's northern route, the town leaders and company captains instantly triggered the alarm system. On the southerly circuit of William Dawes, that did not happen until later. In at least one town, it did not happen at all. Dawes did not awaken the town fathers or militia commanders in the towns of Roxbury, Brockline, Watertown, or Waltham. Probably he did not know them. All right, I'm skipping down. Here was further proof that Paul Revere and his fellow riders on his northern route succeeded in spreading the alarm by engaging the institutions of these rural communities, engaging the institutions of these rural communities in a way that William Dawes did not. None of this is meant to deny William Dawes his role in the Lexington alarm. His ride was firmly documented, most of all by Paul Revere himself, who was always careful to give Dawes a share of the credit. He carried his message to Lexington, just as Dr. Warren had requested, in the face of many dangers. But Paul Revere did that and more. Prescott. So Prescott's a guy who also joined Revere and Dawes. Prescott spread the word through Lincoln and Concord, making an effort to awaken ministers, militia officers, and the family networks of outlying hamlets. He also recruited other couriers in the same way that Revere and Dawes had recruited him. A prearranged system of beacon fires and signal guns was used to muster the militia in what is now the town of Carlisle, north of Concord and Acton. Keyword there, prearranged. A prearranged system of beacon fires and signal guns. You know, I mean, think about that. An historian of the town writes that they were awakened by the cannon and musket fire relay signal system, gathered up their muskets, powder and ball, and began to assemble at the first parish meeting house in Carlisle Center. Okay. Let's see. In the flow of information, one may discover the importance of the preparations made, the impact of decisions along the way, and the role of associations with other Whig leaders. Many of the links in that chain had been forged in advance. Others were improvised by Paul Revere and his friends, who prudently prepared for the worst case. Had they acted otherwise, the outcome might well have been different. Okay, great. Paul Revere's Ride, fantastic book. If you did not check out my video on the 250th anniversary of Paul Revere's Ride in Lexington and Concord, go check that out. But what is my point? One of the reasons that Paul Revere's Ride was so successful in preparing everyone for the events that would happen the following morning, which ended up kicking off what we now call the War for Independence, were prearranged. So there's two things going on. So a lot of it was prearranged, and then there were some improvisations and some prudent decisions that were made, during the event, during the ride, what has come to be known as the Lexington Alarm. So if you remember, I mean, there are lanterns being used to signal across, the waterway. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff going on. So I don't want to, I already did a whole video on that. I don't want to talk about that here. But my point is, in that video, I talked about information sharing and being prepared, having a network of people that you can engage with. It talked about how Paul Revere, compared to Dawes, he engaged the institutions in a way that Dawes did not. Doesn't mean Dawes is not a hero. Doesn't mean Dawes didn't do what he needed to do that night. He did. But the way that Revere did it was more effective, because it wasn't just randomly engaging with people or whatever. It's you have to engage the right people at the right time to kind of activate this network of information sharing and preparation, etc. And some of that was done in the moment, it was improvised, prudent decisions made in the moment, but a lot of it was prearranged. Okay. So this stuff is important. All right. That's kind of, that's kind of my point. So let me talk a little bit about the book, and then we're going to talk about some other things. So um, the book, right? So um, I'm hanging out in North Carolina, and everything that happened made me think, you know what? Let me check this book out that I know happens in Western North Carolina. And I was really glad that I did. So William Forstchen has written other books. He's probably most well known for this one. I was not familiar with anything he had written before this book. He lives in Black Mountain, North Carolina. Black Mountain was one of the towns that I was in when I was, up in that area. That's where I went to the town meeting and where I went to the meeting of the members of the church congregation. Okay, so I'm going to read a little bit here from this book, because there are a lot of lessons that you can take from this book that will make you think about things that you might not otherwise think about. And it's put together in a format that is very readable, because at the end of the day, it's a fictitious story. But that doesn't mean that it's not valuable. It is valuable. Now, the foreword by this book is from Newt Gingrich, which I do find kind of funny. Remember that guy, Newt Gingrich? Listen, I don't know why this book was written. I don't know if it was meant to be like a work of predictive programming or whatever. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. Not my point. Even if it was, there's a lot of value that can be taken from the book. And I do highly recommend it, which is one of the reasons that I don't necessarily want to go through a lot of the plot, because I want you to read it. Okay, so I'm just going to start reading here from the acknowledgments. So special thanks must go to my friend Newt Gingrich for kindly providing the foreword to this book and his crucial contacts. So Newt Gingrich introduced Forstchen, the author, to a guy named Captain Bill Sanders from the Navy. Captain Bill Sanders, who serves with our Navy, is one of the world's leading experts on the topic, meaning the topic of EMPs, electromagnetic pulse weapons. It was Newt who introduced me to him. And as I worked on this project, his advice was invaluable, along with his friendship. I must emphasize that Captain Sanders is a true professional. At times, I asked questions to which he replied, I can't answer that. And there the discussion ended. Everything he did help me with is public record and not classified. Good to know. Now, why do I read that? To underscore the importance of what's called the open source. So just stuff that you can find out there, widely distributed. So don't think that you need access to secret information or whatever to kind of understand what's going on in the world. There's a lot you can discern that you don't need to access that at all. All right, great. Blah, 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 led me to this story set in my hometown, Black Mountain, Asheville, and Montreat College, where I teach history, are all very real. Okay, I kind of chopped off that sentence. Let me read that whole thing again. After so many books set in the past or future, for the first time, I turned to writing one set now, and it was Gene's advice that led me to this story set in my hometown. Black Mountain, Asheville, and Montreat College, where I teach history, are all very real. And they are. Black Mountain and Montreat are, just east of Asheville. Montreat's a tiny little school, and obviously the author teaches he teaches history there. The cry, the barbarians are at the gates, too often comes as a terrifying bolt out of the blue, which is often the last cry ever heard. There are those in this world today who do wish this upon us and will strive to achieve it. As was said by Thomas Jefferson, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. I pray that years from now, as time winds down for me, critics will say this was nothing more than a work of folly, and I will be content, for the vigil was kept, and thus my daughter and those I love will never know this world I write of. So that's kind of how he ends his acknowledgments. Now, again, so what's happening in the backdrop of this novel is there's been an EMP that has been used, as an act of war. All right. So again, I'm less concerned with the specifics of this novel and just kind of the general lessons that can be derived from it. that we can apply to a variety of emergency type situations, like the hurricane that I also referred to, which is why I wanted to use that as a real world example that has happened in the last couple of months, where I was there and at least saw some of what happened, and therefore could kind of glean my own lessons from it that I then communicated to other people. And many of you are familiar with it too, either because you helped or you suffered through it, or just because you observed what others were doing because you saw what was happening on the news or whatever, and at least are familiar with it that way. All right, so this is from the foreword, which was written by Newt Gingrich. Though this book is a work of fiction, it is also a work of fact, perhaps a future history. All right. There has been much attention given since 9/11 to a wide variety of threats to our nation. Additional attacks by the hijacking of commercial airliners, biological and chemical attacks, even the potential of a so-called dirty bomb, or even an actual nuclear detonation in the center of one of our major cities. Not mentioned here are the actions of our own government against the people, but whatever. But few have talked about, let alone heard about, the terrible, in fact, overwhelming threat of EMP, which is shorthand for electromagnetic pulse weapon. My friend Bill Forstchen, which is the author, has co-authored 6 historical novels with me across the years. I have gotten to know him closely. He holds a PhD in history from Purdue. He has specialized in the history of military technology, and this is no wild flight of fantasy on his part. In fact, the start of this book was a conversation that Bill and I shared several years back, concluding with his announcement that he felt he should write a novel about the threat to raise public awareness. As I said before, I see this book as a terrifying future history that might come true. Now, again, was the idea to write this book just all about, raising awareness? Was there something more sinister behind it? Don't know. But regardless, still can be a valuable read. Such books have a significant tradition in their own right. H.G. Wells wrote frightfully accurate prophecies of what history now calls World Wars I and II. Well, I mean, H.G. Wells is, kind of an insider of the global elite, but whatever. Let's see. I also compare it to, perhaps the most famous of the future history books of modern times, George Orwell's 1984. Okay, great. So he says, I hope that Bill's novel may do the same in raising awareness. The place Bill writes about is real. Asheville, Black Mountain, Montreat. He has set this story in his hometown and the college that he works at. I remember when he was writing the book and we'd talk. More than once, he was deeply disturbed by what he had researched, discovered, and was now trying to express as a story for all to read. What hit him the most, he told me, is that he kept picturing his teenage daughter in this nightmare reality. And I think as you read the book, you will see that point of identification. It struck me deeply as well, for I have 2 grandchildren. As he wishes to protect his daughter from this fate, so do I wish to protect my grandchildren, to be able to pass on to them an America that is safe from such threats. The threat is real, and we as Americans must face that threat, prepare, and know what to do to prevent it. Or if we do not, 1 second after, the America we know, cherish, and love will be gone forever. Now, I will tell you, so where Newt Gingrich here talks about how Forstchen would kind of remark to him like, hey, this is kind of a tough book for me to write because, I'm picturing my own family or my own daughter in the book as I'm writing it, etc. So this book's a rough read. It's a really good book, even just from like an entertainment standpoint. It's a good book, but it is chilling. And it needs to be chilling. If it weren't as chilling as it is, it would probably be less value. Because remember, according to the author, we'll take him at his word, he's not writing it. His purpose in writing the book is not to entertain you. Okay. It is to inform you. Entertaining you is probably done. It's like, well, if you're going to write a book, you might as well make it interesting, right? But also, it's done to keep you interested so that you are informed. So let's understand that. We're taking him at his word. He wants to raise awareness. So I want to talk about a couple of other things, and then we'll finish up. Okay, so from the book, and I do want you to read it, or from what I just mentioned with Paul Revere's Ride, or that I mentioned in my other video about Paul Revere's Ride, or my video that I made recently about the counter espionage mindset. You know, there's a certain type of mindset that we have to develop to operate in this world or to be prepared for emergency type situations. And that's part of why I want to talk about this. Okay, so um, in no specific order, let's just talk about some of these things that we need to keep in mind when trying to um, have ideas about how we could develop or be prepared for these types of situations. All right, so the first one that I'm going to mention is leadership, formal and informal. But anytime you have an emergency situation, having leaders is very important. So your formal leaders would be, you know, certain official networks. So in your town or your city, whatever, there's going to be like there's a mayor, there's a city council. Obviously, you know, at your state level, you've got a leadership architecture that is there. There's one at the federal level, clearly. Um, but here we're talking about community. Okay, so there's your family network. You know, then there's your neighborhood or whatever. You know, your friends, your colleagues, and then there's your town or your city. But within that, you're going to have official networks, like I said, and then you're going to have informal networks. So people that very succinctly stated, people who know how to get shit done. Okay. The people who are informal leaders, which means they may or may not have some sort of title affixed to their name, but they are people that are leaders because of who they are. And in an emergency type situation, people may flock to those individuals. Now, that can be good, of course. It can also be bad for a variety of reasons. One, um, tensions can arise when your formal network of authority and your informal network of power don't overlap. Tensions can arise when that happens. Now, and there's a little bit of that is illustrated to some degree in the book. But you got to think about that because in emergent situations, tensions can be very high. And so it's, well, who's in charge? So there are people who are supposed to be in charge. And then there are other people over here that may actually be more prepared to deal with this situation. So if there's a way in which those two networks can kind of merge, you know, it could be better for everybody. As long as you're doing it in a way that reinforces what needs to be done and helping as many people as possible. And hopefully you don't get like a lot of factionalization that results in people, you know, fighting against each other. Okay. And one of the reasons that the book is valuable is because it goes through all of this, but it does it in, you know, story form. So you can kind of see what's happening and you can see how they're having to deal with a lot of these pressures personally or at the family level, the community level, even the nation, you know, the national level. And then what happens? You know, the tribalism that can occur. I mean, you can think about how those situations could arise and can get ugly very, very quickly. So leadership in any type of situation like that is going to be very important. So think about a situation where you have, let's just say like a town mayor, right? Who may be a great guy, maybe a nice guy. And he may be a guy who can perform when the situations are normal. But then when what is normal is no longer there and things start to break down and you need somebody who's a little bit more adaptive, you could have some tension there, right? Maybe that guy is not necessarily suited to be the leader, but what do you do? I mean, if he's, but I'm not saying there are necessarily any easy answers. I'm just, you know, trying to identify some of these tensions that could occur. Um, Experience. So who are people who have experience in these types of situations? So a lot of times, and we saw this in Western North Carolina. So people would um, they would say, hey, a lot of military veterans or, first responders of some variety, they're prepared to deal with these situations. And um, that's not untrue. That could be very true. And some of these guys, they certainly are. But there are other people who, just the way they've lived their lives, some people are just incredibly resourceful, even if they're not a military veteran or they're not a police officer or they're not a first responder of any way. But they may just be a person who's very smart. They may be a person who is very proactive. And they may be a person who just kind of understands what to do in those types of situations. And that could be totally different. Are you talking about if you live in the middle of a city and there was a huge earthquake? Or are you talking about living in the country and a tornado went through or something else, or what happened in Western North Carolina with the hurricane? So it could be different people may be prepared to a greater degree depending on the situation that arises. But then, of course, there are some people that they just always kind of seem to know what to do, and they may have a certain level of experience that allows them to just kind of know because they've been in similar situations and they just kind of know what to do. So, with the military, so what kind of makes, um, why do people kind of look at military individuals in those types of situations? Well, there are some reasons, and some of those reasons are quite valid. Um, and it may have nothing to do with quote unquote combat because a hurricane that goes through is not combat. There's no enemy per se, but that doesn't mean that there aren't some parallels that you can draw from combat, which again, emergency type situations, very, very high stakes, and people need to know what to do and they need to do it. So here's what I would say about just people in general. But I do think certain military folks do exhibit these traits, though they're not unique to just military folks. And I'm gonna just boil it down super simple to three things. Okay, assessment, prioritization, action. Okay, what do I mean by that? So first of all, the ability to immediately survey the situation, assess what is going on, and kind of, and some of them, just intuitive, but like kind of grasp the big picture of what's happening, the variables within the environment, and kind of what that means, right? So just this ability to almost have like a strategic assessment of the situation, right? And then know what needs to be done, but also be able to prioritize what needs to be done. Like this, this is important, this is urgent, but then also between what's important and what's important and urgent, like must happen now. What's urgent but less important, you know? What's important but less urgent. Yeah, I mean, so you just immediately be able to kind of have that calculus as to there are a lot of things that we got to do, but this is what we have to do like right now. But this is what we have to do to prepare for some future date, right? And then action. Now you got to do it. And it may be hard and you still got to do it. So again, assessment, prioritization, action. So those are just some things that I do think in these types of situations, you need people who have that ability, have those traits. And if they have exhibited those traits before, then obviously that's helpful. Let's networks for information, supplies, and support. This is kind of like what we talked about with Paul Revere. So your community right now, you have things that you get. They come to you. They come from very far away. But in emergency type situations, you might have things you need, and you're going to have to be able to get them from somewhere that's much closer to home. So you got to figure out, well, what is it that I can do without? What's a need and what's a want? And having very clearly defined in your mind, which is which. The other thing, so obviously supply networks, I mean, that almost goes without stating, but a support network. In emergency type situations, those are going to be incredibly important. Who can you rely on? Your family, your closest friends. But here's the thing. I have friends of mine that I know in an emergency situation, they're not going to be reliable. Doesn't mean they're not my friends or whatever, but I know. I know they could not be depended upon. Now, is there the chance they might surprise me in an emergency situation? I mean, maybe, but probably not. Just because I know them well enough, I've known them for a very, very, very long time. And maybe other things have happened where that has been demonstrated to me. Some of them are my very, very good friends. But that doesn't mean that I mistake them for someone who is reliable. It doesn't necessarily mean that I wouldn't help them, but they might not necessarily be the first person that I would go to if I needed help from them. So anyway, just things like that, just understanding that. Also, spiritual support, going to be incredibly important. Emotional support, going to be incredibly important when the stakes are very high. Maybe, and I'm not trying to be funny when I say this, but maybe people have died, other people are injured, people are starting to freak out, people are starting to break down. People who were resilient the first couple of days are becoming much less resilient as time goes on. I mean, it's things like that, which brings me to my next point. So how do you create resilience in yourself? Your personal preparedness and the preparedness of your family, your community, etc. Well, personal preparedness, what is your why? What do you live for? And I know that gets thrown around a lot, but anyway, but what is your why? What do you live for? And if a situation like that were to occur, how could you distill everything in your life down to only the most essential items? How you care for your family, what it is you would prioritize if you had to kind of shed most things out of your life, right? Understanding that ahead of time. And it may mean maybe there are some super extraneous things that we all shed from our lives now. I'm not trying to, so again, the purpose of this video is not in any way to say that I think some disaster is coming imminently. I'm not in any way communicating that. I do think in a general way that bad times are ahead. I'm not saying how bad or imminently or whatever, but I do think we have to have conversations like this right now. Another thing. So spiritual preparedness, your what is it you believe in? Your faith or what you hold to. Another thing, physical fitness. So here's the thing with physical fitness. So in an emergency type situation, your physical, your physical readiness level, which is a huge deal in the military for obvious reasons. But in an emergency type situation, it's going to be a big deal, as well as your mental toughness. And physical fitness and mental toughness are not exactly the same thing. They can be related. They're not exactly the same thing, though. But physical fitness. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody has to be a superhero. And when I'm in this video, I'm not talking just to, young people that are super fit or work out all the time. I'm talking to everybody. So if you're, maybe you're no longer in your physical prime or, whatever, but let me just ask a question. Let's not even talk about, gym strength or whatever. And there's a time and a place for all that. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I work out almost every day and have my whole life. But let me put it in a different way. If you had to move on foot to the next town over, could you do it? Before we start worrying about what would you have to have on your back or whatever. But if you had to move one town over, could you do it? How long would it take you? Could you move X number of miles in a day if you had to? I'm not even talking about, could you do it? Like how fast or not even talking about that. It's an open-ended question because I'm just kind of putting it out there for people to think about. Could you move 10 miles? Could you move 20 miles if you had to? Not talking about running, not talking about, time limit here, but just if you had to do it, why? Why? Maybe you have to evacuate where you are. And maybe you have to do it at night in the dark because there are looters or because there's some other security threat out there where you have to do it, at night. So for a variety of reasons, I'm just throwing that question out there, but could you do that? Um, are you on medication that, if you could not get that medication, it would be severely detrimental to your health? What happens if the supply lines are broken down for whatever reason, or in an emergency situation? So just things like that people have to think about. Or maybe it's not you, but maybe it's your spouse. Maybe you have a child who has a particular condition or whatever. Maybe it's your aging parents. Maybe it's your infant. All these things that you gotta figure out. What do we do? So just things to think about. Some of these have no easy answers, but when we talk about resilience, there is personal resilience. My resilience, whether it's physically, whether it's spiritually, whether it's psychologically, in this type of situation. Like I said, something occurs. It's one thing to be resilient for 72 hours. It's another thing to be resilient for 72 days, 72 months. I mean, how long are we going to suffer the effects of, whatever may happen, or, may have happened in this notional scenario we're kind of talking about, right? Okay, so priorities of work. I'm going to show you guys something, and some of you guys are going to laugh. All right, so I don't know if you guys can even tell what this is. All right, some of you out there might. Okay, so this green tape, it's called 100-mile-an-hour tape, the military, right? You can see my name. You see where my name's scratched in there, Miller. Okay, yeah, it's written on the sides here. This is so if anybody found this, they would know it was mine. All right, what is this? This, my friends, is the coveted Ranger Handbook. The reason that it's taped like this is to give it some waterproofing. This is 20 years old. I mean, this is from when I went through Ranger School. This beat up book is the Sapper Handbook from when I went through Sapper School. It's a little bit bigger than the Ranger Handbook, a little bit thicker. But anyway, very interesting resources. They're both 20 years old. I went through both of those schools in 2005 in the Army. But and you can find these like online. And if you think it'd be super cool to find one of these online and read through it, you might be disappointed at kind of how boring it is. But that's not to say there's not some very useful information in here. But there's one part that I want to read from here in the Ranger Handbook. You can find the exact same thing in the Sapper Handbook. But what I want to read is, gotta find it real quick, is about a patrol base. Okay. So the reason I want to read about a patrol base really quickly is because there's an important lesson that I want to take from this, because I think it applies in an emergency situation. In reality, it applies in more than just that, but I think there's some lessons we can take from this that apply directly to what we're talking about. So reading from the Ranger Handbook here, it says a patrol base is a security perimeter that is set up when a squad or platoon conducting a patrol halts for an extended period. All right, so just think of it this way, like if you're not from a military background or whatever. Okay, you've been moving through some terrain, let's just say like a forest or whatever, wooded terrain. You're in the middle of conducting missions, but you got to stop, even if it's just overnight. Okay, so a patrol base is a security perimeter that is set up when a squad or platoon conducting a patrol halts for an extended period. Patrol bases should not be occupied for more than a 24-hour period, except in emergencies. A patrol never uses the same patrol base twice. All right, so don't worry about all that. I mean, I guess if you were in like a crazy situation, then yeah, that could apply. But that's not. I'm not trying to get too specific in the way that I want to apply these lessons to this. But there's some stuff here that's useful. Patrol bases are typically used to avoid detection by eliminating movement, to hide a unit during a long, detailed reconnaissance, to perform maintenance on weapons, equipment, eat, rest, etc. Plan and issue orders, reorganize after infiltrating an enemy area, establish a base from which to execute several consecutive or concurrent operations. Okay, great. But what I want to talk about is something super important: priorities of work. All right, so because this goes right into developing the mindset for emergency type situations, but in some ways, the mindset we all should have right now. Because in some ways, we're kind of already in emergency type situations, though obviously could get more acute. Priorities of work. So what this is let's just say your unit has conducted a mission. You're awaiting a follow-on mission that you're going to conduct. Okay. But now you're going to spend, and you're in the middle of the woods, and you're going to spend the night. And in order to spend the night, you're going to set up a secure perimeter where you can pass the night, and you can, keep yourselves secure while sleeping, but also performing some weapons maintenance, eating, other things. All right. In order to do that, once you pick your site in the middle of this forest or wherever, and there's a lot that goes into picking the right site, but you're going to establish your patrol base. And again, I'm kind of using this as an analogy for other stuff, not necessarily not specific to, oh, I need to set up a secure perimeter in the woods. I mean, I guess that could apply in an emergency type situation, but I'm using this as an analogy. So priorities of work. Once the patrol leader is briefed by the recon teams and determines the area is suitable for a patrol base, the leader establishes or modifies defensive work priorities in order to establish the defense for the patrol base. So first things first. All right, we're going to set the patrol base here. All right, we've reconned the area, no enemy in the area. We're going to site the patrol base here. What's the first thing we got to do? We got to set up a defense of the patrol base. Everybody in the military who's done this knows the first priority of work is security. If you don't secure the area, you don't secure your patrol base, then you can't conduct the other activities. Security is first, okay? Priorities of work. It's not a laundry list of tasks to be completed. To be effective, priorities of work must consist of a task, a given time, and a measurable performance standard. So the patrol leader says, we're going to do this in this time frame. And then after that, we're going to go to the next task, blah, 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 blah. For each priority of work, a clear standard must be issued to guide elements in the successful accomplishment of each task. It must also be designated whether the work will be controlled in a centralized or decentralized manner. Priorities of work are determined in accordance to the mission, situation, the terrain, etc. Priorities of work may include, but are not limited to, the following tasks: security. Prepare to use all passive and active measures to control 100% of the perimeter, 100% of the time, regardless of the percentage of weapons used to cover that 100% of the terrain. So half your guys may be asleep because you're going to say, hey, we're going to pull 50% security. All right, which means you're pulling security, your buddy's asleep, and then you guys are going to switch. But even if you're pulling 50% security or 33% security or whatever, you're still securing 100% of the perimeter 100% of the time. The whole perimeter is being secured always, but you may not be using every weapon system to do that. All right. So again, this is not about patrol bases. This is about understanding priorities of work. Your personal security, or the security of your community first. That could be security from an enemy. That could be security from the effects of a natural disaster or whatever. It could be ensuring that you're not swept away in a flood, whatever it is. Security first, because if you don't establish security, you can't carry out the other priorities of work. A withdrawal plan. You need to immediately, perhaps under duress, withdraw from that site. You have to have a plan ahead of time as to how you would do that, because now if the situation arises, then you must withdraw. You can't come up with a plan then. Communications. So this is a super important one. Communications must be maintained with higher headquarters, observation posts, and within the unit. May be rotated between the patrols, radio men to allow accomplishment of continuous radio monitoring, radio maintenance, act as runners for the patrol leader, or conduct other priorities of work. Communications is a huge one. You know, when I was in Black Mountain, a lot of the communications was people coming to the town center. But you could have couriers, you could have runners. I mean, Paul Revere's ride, you had dudes on horses, you know, riding through the middle of the night, and then enlisting the help of other people to continue to spread the news, right? Mission preparation and planning. The patrol leader uses the patrol base to plan, issue orders, rehearse, inspect, and prepare for future missions. All right, so hey, tonight we're gonna be in this patrol base, but tomorrow we're gonna have a follow-on mission. So we got to plan that mission now, and we got to rehearse for it. We got to, you know, there will be combat inspections that have to happen ahead of that follow-on mission. Weapons and equipment maintenance. Patrol leader ensures that machine guns, weapon systems, communications equipment, and night vision devices, as well as other equipment, are maintained. All right, these items are not broken down at the same time for maintenance. You don't have every guy break down his weapon at the same time to clean it, because that'll be the moment that your patrol base is discovered by the enemy. You get attacked, and now you got a bunch of dudes trying to put their weapons back together. Water resupply, you know, a feed plan. Okay, a plan for alerting everybody in the event that you need to alert people. All right, so what's my point here? Because again, you know, pulling on the old Ranger handbook here that I've had for 20 years, you know, still, you know, mostly waterproofed. What's my plan here? Because again, it's not about I'm using that as an analogy. You know, it's not about a patrol base. What I'm saying is prioritization. Okay, you secure yourself against what can happen first. I mean, that applies right now, but also in an emergency type situation. Okay, you conduct maintenance of systems. Could be weapons, could be communications equipment, but it could just be other systems that have to run to keep your network or your community safe, whether it's now or whether it's in the event of an emergency. Okay, and then, but you also, you know, you got to eat, you got to find food, you got to feed others, and yes, you have to rest. But as it spells out there, rest is not an end of itself, an end unto itself. You rest in order to be prepared for the follow-on mission. Okay, so it's survival first, and then it's comfort. You know, so you have priorities of work from most important to least important. You know, needs are more important than wants, and it's prioritization of resources. So what happens when you have a demand that is larger than your supply? There's going to be tension, and there's going to have to be an allocation of resources, and there are going to be some tough decisions that have to be made. But when we talk about a demand being larger than the supply, well, we also have to understand, what do we mean by demand? Are we talking about needs, or are we talking about wants? Because those are not the same thing. The other thing is priorities of action. What must be done now? What must be done later? But if we always focus on now and we're never focused on later, what happens when later comes and we're unprepared? So I don't necessarily know what my great overarching message, you know, here is. I just think that these are things we got to talk about. And it's important that people start to think about these things and start to come up with a plan for themselves and their families, because I think things are already getting bad. So some of these things that we've spoken about tonight, they already apply. And then in a more acute situation, they would apply to an even greater degree. And then, yes, I do think this is a book that is worth reading. Again, this is 1 Second After by William Forstchen. But like I said, it's a rough read, but it needs to be a rough read. Otherwise, the impact would not be there. So I hope some of this was maybe a little bit helpful. If not, maybe in terms of providing you with a list of do this. That was not my intent. And I'm not even necessarily saying I'm an expert here at all. What I'm saying is, I think it's important that we all begin to think about this, myself included. And I just wanted to share with you some of my thoughts on this, even if not necessarily to produce some sort of a laundry list of actions that you should do. So anyway, you guys let me know. Let me know if this was helpful. And also if there are things that this makes you think about, or if you have ideas, or if you have something you want to say, hey, people need to be thinking now about this, this, or this, then, put it down below in the comments. All right. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate it.